Are there actually foods that can boost your mood fairly quickly? Yeah, there are. And while there is actually an abundance of potential foods that will lift your mood, the 5 that I'm going to cover today are ones that are involved in a specific pathway that makes them more likely to activate your happiness hormone. Hi, I'm Jess. I'm a clinical nutritionist, and this channel is all about optimizing your diet and lifestyle for better mental health. And today we're actually going to be talking about my all-time top 5 foods up until this point, because if you know anything about nutrition science, you know that it's something that's always in flux. We're always learning more and discovering more things regarding all of the research. But anyways, these current foods that are my top 5 are ones that are all involved in the synthesis of your neurotransmitter, dopamine. Yes, dopamine is a neurotransmitter and it also acts as a hormone. And while serotonin is often referred to as the happiness, mood-boosting hormone, dopamine is equally involved, if you ask me, in conditions like depression because dopamine is actually what regulates motivation. It's known for establishing those reward pathways, which is a reason why it's so involved in addiction like alcohol and drug abuse. But we do need healthy levels of dopamine to go about our days and to generally feel a certain level of satisfaction and happiness. Furthermore, dopamine is a precursor for our hormones epinephrine and norepinephrine, otherwise known as adrenaline. So when I'm thinking about something that's going to boost my mood and maybe even how I feel physically fairly quickly, it's going to be involved in this pathway. So let's talk about the top 5 foods for boosting that mood. But also stay tuned for the end where I'm gonna do an experiment where I'm gonna eat all of the foods that we go over today at once, and then we'll see how I feel. Now, I wanted the following foods to be foods and not drinks that contain caffeine because while caffeine really does boost dopamine levels, it can be a little bit too much for some people and cause anxiety. So the only food on this list that contains a little bit of caffeine is the first food, and that is chocolate. But the reasons why chocolate is on this list actually has nothing to do with caffeine. That's just like a little bit of an additive. But chocolate actually contains several compounds that interact with dopamine. Chocolate contains small amounts of phenylethylamine, otherwise known as PEA, which basically helps our brain cells release dopamine. In addition to this, chocolate contains flavanols, epicatechin, and catechin, which are natural MAO inhibitors. MAO is an enzyme that actually helps clear out neurotransmitters from the brain, which is one of the reasons why MAO inhibitors were actually one of the first antidepressants developed. So MAO inhibitors essentially help boost the levels of serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine in the brain. So as you can see here, chocolate is actually working on multiple angles, and that might be one of the reasons why it's too stimulating for some. And what I would say to that is that it's likely an amount factor. As an example, I pretty much eat a few squares of dark chocolate every day in the afternoon. It helps get me through the end of my day. But if I eat too much, I generally feel like I need to go exercise or work off that extra adrenaline afterwards. Number 2, the next mood boosting food on the list is peanut butter. And if you're thinking, I knew there was a reason I loved Reese's, well, you're probably right. So as you can see from this chart here, L-tyrosine is the main amino acid that we actually need in order to essentially make dopamine and norepinephrine. It's one of the first steps in this process. Some of the highest dietary sources of L-tyrosine are protein, specifically animal protein. So if you want to have adequate dopamine levels on a regular basis, then having adequate protein in your diet is really important. But peanut butter had to be on this list because it's also fairly high in L-tyrosine. It also contains the amino acid L-tryptophan, which is a precursor to serotonin synthesis. So taking this into consideration and its classic combination with chocolate, it's kind of just a no-brainer. Other nuts like almonds and cashews also contain pretty good levels of tyrosine as well. So if you don't eat peanuts or are avoiding them, then you could certainly do other nuts and nut butters. But if you were looking for an excuse to eat peanut butter, then I got you covered. The third food on the list that's gonna be a pretty good mood booster for most people are chickpeas. The reason why we're talking about chickpeas today is because they're pretty much the highest dietary source of vitamin B6. B6 is required for the conversion of the amino acid L-tyrosine that we just talked about into dopamine. B6 is super important not only for this dopamine pathway, but for neurotransmitter synthesis in general. It is a very common cofactor, coenzyme for many physiological processes. So having some chickpeas, maybe in something like hummus for a snack, is an excellent way to get the dopamine production pumping. My only caveat to this is if you have IBS, IBD, or any sort of digestive disorder where chickpeas don't work well for you, maybe they make you more bloated, then this is likely not going to be a mood boosting food for you. But if you generally do okay digesting them, then chickpeas will likely be great. The fourth food on the list that's going to give us some really awesome mood boosting properties is citrus or citrus fruit in general. And this is really because of the vitamin C content. So taking a look back at this chart that you're gonna see a few times, vitamin C is needed to turn dopamine into adrenaline. So not getting enough vitamin C actually causes dopamine levels to drop. So while all of these foods have been working on building the dopamine pathway, it's really that norepinephrine or adrenaline that's going to lead to a physical output of feeling like we have more energy, essentially. Vitamin C, like B6, is a water-soluble vitamin, and these vitamins we need a pretty constant supply of because we do not store them in our body. So while citrus fruit isn't the only way to ensure that you're getting this, it is probably the easiest and quickest snack or food that you can have for that quick vitamin C boosting effect. And the last and final mood boosting food on the list, the fifth food, is one of my favorite foods and one of my favorite snacks, and that is actually oysters. Oysters are high in omega-3 fatty acids, and omega-3 fatty acids actually help with dopamine signaling, receptor binding, and increasing overall levels of dopamine, while also lowering MAO enzyme activity, which, as you remember, is that enzyme that clears out those neurotransmitters from the brain. We know a lot of this because of the research that's done on omega-3 fatty acids relating to Parkinson's disease, which, if you're not aware, is a disease categorized by a lack of dopamine. So omega-3 fats are important for maintaining and somewhat modulating these dopamine levels. Obviously, there are a lot of foods high in omega-3 fats, so why the oysters? Well, oysters are also the highest dietary source of zinc, and zinc also helps maintain healthy dopamine levels. Zinc is additionally essential for energy production, and it reduces anxiety. So while it's going to provide you with all these mood boosting properties, the zinc should also be relatively grounding as well. So you can see how we've somewhat worked through this dopamine pathway, which actually was not my original intention when I was putting together this list of foods, and was something that I noticed while I was putting it together, which is super cool. Like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, as an experiment, I did decide to eat all of these foods at once and essentially see how I felt afterwards. Let's see what future Jess has to say about that. Hey guys, so this is the final product. I have some kiwi. I chose kiwi for vitamin C because I like kiwi. And apparently these kiwis have 3 times the amount of vitamin C as oranges. We'll see. I got my oysters, I got my crackers, I got my hummus, I got my peanut butter, I got my chocolate, and then I added in some pistachios as well. So let's see how it goes. So, Chandler wasn't as interested in dancing with me as he sometimes is. So dancing, joking aside, I'm feeling pretty good. I ate that meal almost an hour ago. It's about 3 p.m. And while, you know, I'm not feeling like really overstimulated or like I have a bunch of adrenaline, for it being this time in the day, I feel pretty good and I still feel pretty motivated. And that's what I really wanted to see if it would have an effect on, because this is generally the time in my day where I take a significant dip in my energy and ultimately my mood as well, where I'm more prone to feeling like depressed and unmotivated and all of those things. The last thing that I want to say about dopamine is something that I've learned about in my research regarding food and neuroscience, and that is that there are certain things, supplements, compounds that obviously are going to raise your dopamine more extremely. An example of this would be something like drugs, but the more extreme the dopamine level raise is, the more significantly you're going to feel it come down from that. So the really awesome thing about foods is that when you always have those building blocks and those stores, like you have the nutrients to make dopamine, then you're less likely to have those significant dips. So that's really was part of the experiment today, to see if I could have a sustained, motivated, mood boosting, feel good energy. And I think it went pretty well. I want to know from you, are there any foods, whether on this list or not on this list, that you feel very much lift your mood? I would absolutely love to know what they are so that I can maybe do a little bit of research and figure out if there's a reason why. If you enjoyed this video, then please let me know by hitting the thumbs up. And you may also be someone who would enjoy this video on bioflavonoids, which is a little bit more science-y, but it goes over these compounds that have specific antidepressant properties. So hopefully I'll see you in that one.